It's been a while since both of us are here for this.
It's true. This is the first time.
Yeah, in like 2 months. You asked for it, now here it is. This is our 101 course for lighting for your church live streams, testimonies, and photography. Welcome to Blackbar. Hi, I am Caleb. I don't think I need to tell you how important good lighting is to the production value of your video. Obviously, it's the difference between something like this and something like this. There are many different types of lighting, but today we're going to be focusing on what I call studio lighting. We're not going to be dealing with stage lighting. We're not going to be dealing with outdoor lighting, specifically when we have a mostly stationary target and we're able to move lights around them at a more controlled level. Today we're going to go over the very basics of lighting, that being the color of your lights, the size of your lights, and the position of your lights. Let's get into it. First up, color. As you probably already knew, there are many different colors of lights that are available. We have daylight lights, we have incandescent lights, we have fluorescent lights, all of them emitting a slightly different color of the light that we see. In the film world, we measure the temperature of light in a unit we call Kelvin, or K for short. For example, roughly tungsten lights, or incandescent lights, are around the 3000 range, while broad daylight can be as much as 5000. For the most part, in general, it's best to be using similar lights with similar color temperatures when lighting a scene or a subject. Again, in general, you want to try to avoid mixing color temperatures. Try to keep it consistent. That's going to lead you to a much more uniform image all around. However, a contrast in color temperature is used to great effect to communicate certain sorts of moods or feelings in film. For example, in the film world, the most common color temperature difference is having a warm light lighting the subject or the person in the frame and cool lights lighting the background. This is going to create really good separation between your subject and the background and make the subject pop more in the frame. If you already have a few lights around that you're using and you need to change the color temperature cheaply, a gel is a super inexpensive way of changing the color of your light without breaking the bank. You can buy them in all different sorts of sizes and colors and simply clip them onto the front of a light to get the lighting that you need. If you don't have any lights lying around already, I would highly suggest investing into LED lights. We'll have a couple really good and expensive options linked below, but they're a really great option if you want something with adjustable intensity and adjustable color temperature. They're available in all sorts of budget options and sizes, but does size matter? Hey Blackbar, Caleb here. The penumbra is the fade in between the darkest and the lightest point of a shadow. You can see here right now we have my phone's light casting on a small microphone, and we have a very small, tight penumbra. There is a very sharp shadow on this wall right here. That is in large part due to the size of the light that we're using. Imagine, if you will, a bunch of individual light rays coming from what is basically a very small singular point and coming out towards this microphone. Because they are all more or less coming from the same point, light is either hitting the microphone or it isn't, leading to a very crisp, clean shadow. Sometimes that is what you want when you're lighting a subject. However, it can be very unflattering in most cases. As you can see by my face, minor blemishes are being pulled out, even individual beard hairs that might be out of place. In general, unless you have absolutely perfect skin, a small light will cast very sharp, hard shadows on the face, which generally will make you look less attractive and less professional. Now, in comparison, something like this, a much larger light, casts a much softer shadow. It has a much wider penumbra. Now let's think about why that is exactly. Because the light is larger, the rays of light have a much wider range that they can start from. So if we think of a ray of light coming from the very top of this light and coming straight over and missing the snowball and hitting the wall behind it, obviously we're lighting up that area. However, a photon coming from the bottom of this light coming up is going to hit that snowball instead. So instead, the very lowest ray is going to hit way up here. Over the course of all of the rays coming from all the different directions, we get some areas behind the snowball that are being lit and others that are not, in kind of a gradient. Because of the wide range that rays can start from, we have a gradient of a shadow that is larger than we did with the iPhone light. Thus, the principle of size is the bigger the light, the softer the shadow. And in most cases, a bigger light and a softer shadow is more desirable for people when lighting their faces. A lot of the inconsistencies, a lot of the blemishes are actually harder to see with a softer light because we don't have a very specific sharp light pointing them out. Now you might say, Caleb, I don't have access to a larger light, I only have smaller lights. Fortunately, there's a way to make a smaller light larger. Now here we are again with the smaller light from my iPhone and the sharper, less desirable shadow when lighting faces. But now, this time, I have a sheet of diffusion paper. If you haven't seen anything like this before, it's a lot almost like wax paper. It's a little bit translucent, but it lets some light through, and it's very useful for changing the properties of our light. Now watch what happens when I place this in front of the light. Obviously, yes, it did get a little dimmer, but you see the penumbra that we have is much wider. It's a much softer light. It's easy to think that there's something special or fancy going on with this specific piece of paper, but all that we've done, if you actually look at the diffusion paper, is increase the size of the light comparatively to that small little light to this much bigger, although dimmer, light. And that's so you can make a smaller light much bigger. You can see from the lighting in this B-roll, what you're actually looking at is me being lit by a diffusionless, smaller light. You can see the lighting is much harsher, much sharper, and a lot of the blemishes are more accentuated. Fortunately, we have one of these very large, foldable diffusers that you can buy relatively cheaply online. Placing that in front of our light spreads out the light quite a bit more and gives us a much more pleasing, bigger, softer shadow. So we've talked about color, we've talked about size, now we need to talk about position. Whoa! So ignore the bad lighting, but generally in the film world, we have come down to a standard that most people call the 3-point light setup. Let's go over the basics. First, we have the key light. Oh, it's bright. Now the key light is the brightest and probably most important light that we have. It lights the front of the face and gives us most of the information that we're looking for. Nick, our cameraman here, has been helpful enough to provide us with his stabilizer here, so I can show him making some adjustments on my face, and you can see how we move the light and it changes the lighting that we see. So the first thing Nick's gonna do is move the light to the left and to the right.
Your left or my left?
Doesn't matter.
Alright, I'll do my left.
All right. So you can see by moving it back and forth, we're either going to light the majority of my face from the front or a more dramatic light from the side, leaving this side of my face in shadow. Now there isn't necessarily a good or a bad thing, it's very much up to preference, but in general, if you want a more dramatic look, you want to be off to the side. If you want something a bit more clean, albeit flat, you want to be closer to the front. Next, we have the fill light. We turned off the rest of the room so you can see it, but that is a fill light. The fill light, which goes on the opposite side than the key light, fills in the shadow that's left by the key light on the opposite side of my face. Now generally, you don't want your fill light to be as bright as your key light. For example, Nick, if you actually point it towards me, you can see that the lighting has gotten very flat and rather unflattering. So instead, what we do usually is bounce the light. It's an alternative diffusing where you actually point the light away at a wall or a bounce pad or a diffuser, and it gives you, again, a much larger and darker light to fill in the darker parts of my face. Lastly, behind me, we have the backlight. Oh. There it is. The backlight does a lot to separate the subject from the background behind them. In general, you don't want to go overkill with a backlight. In general, just a little bit of a rim on the side of the face or on the back of the head will go a long way in separating you from the background. A 3-point light setup is a great place to start if you don't know where to begin, but it is not the only light setup there is out there. Feel free to experiment, try new things, figure out what you're trying to communicate, and use lights like anything as a tool to share the story that you're telling. Thanks so much for watching this episode of Blackbar. If you haven't already, make sure to check out our podcast. We go way more in depth into the stuff that we're talking about here in these videos and share our own personal stories. In addition, make sure to join the Blackbar Discord. We've got media professionals, pastors, and volunteers all working together to make church media, marketing, and tech as great as it can be. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.